Today, I wanted to talk about the difference between a shaman and a drug addict, because they're certainly two wildly different things. And if you really look into what a shaman truly is and the cultures and traditions that associate with such, I don't think that you would see the same thing that you would see in someone who's considered a drug addict. And put simply, I'm a shaman who's always had transcendental type of experiences from things like plant medicines. And honestly, the difference between plant medicines and drugs in the way people would think are two wildly different things. One is extremely physically addictive and can get someone addicted within the first experience, and their body usually immediately starts creating a thing which is like, the way that I think about it, it's kind of like a survival need, like eating or drinking, right? That's exactly what physical addiction creates, is a physical need to that thing where your body doesn't feel right, or you start to feel sick. And that's why I've never done things like that. I've never done hard drugs. Because I've always known better with what I've seen growing up. These type of shamanic experiences can actually offer consciousness expansion, self-reflection, healing from past trauma. It can actually help people gain a completely different perspective and actually help people heal from things like addiction. And within these type of experiences that have been clinically studied, it actually can allow someone to completely stop a harder substance, an actual drug, and the perspective it gives them, plus the connection to God that it can offer, can allow someone who's had much worse addictions to get actually completely away from such, which is a very beautiful thing. Now, going back to it actually being able to heal addiction type of thing, I actually have a much different perspective on addiction in general. And I think just because someone has an addictive set of behaviors at one point in their life doesn't mean they're always like that. I don't think any person, as long as they fully get sober and change their life for the better and aren't doing the drug, because I consider addiction to be, at least in the drug addict type of way, a drug that a person cannot live without for the rest of their life, that they always need or can't be without. A shaman, though, in the way people would traditionally think, is a person who is like a gatekeeper, or a person who allows a portal to the spiritual realms, the spirit, or I guess what you could say, a direct experience of God, or the spirit and soul, which is within you, which is the divine essence of God. And obviously you don't even necessarily need something like that to, start to connect to spirit, your soul, or God. But if people have never believed or experienced in such a thing, that is the full shamanic experience, I guess you could say. A full, direct, one-to-one experience of God, or at least the opening of the senses to the spirit, soul, or those type of planes or dimensions or realms of thought. It can allow you to view life from a much higher perspective, and honestly, open up to new versions of you and let old versions of you basically pass away. It can allow you to view from the spirit, the spiritual realms, your soul, or the higher realms. And those are all basically truer natures of reality, because the physical realm is technically a less true version than the higher realms, because it's a microcosm of the macrocosm of the entire universe. Most people just don't perceive spiritually or from a higher perspective. They only perceive from the physical realm. But a shaman doesn't just have to do with plant medicines. A shaman is actually a whole lifestyle and a way of being. And shamans live their whole lives the same way, being very connected spiritually, very connected to their soul, very connected to the source, very connected to God. And every single aspect of them is healing. Every single aspect of them leads to consciousness and thought and thinking, because that's the divine essence of God. Every part of them heals people. Just being around them, it heals. it makes people think about what they need to heal, and shamans live their whole lives in the spirit realm and connecting to such and the energy of God to be a good channel of that such energy and to help people and guide them in the right way of life. Because a shaman is a person who guides communities to a new way of being, a better way of being, a way of healing, you know. I would say though that you can become psychologically addicted to literally anything that gives you pleasure. And even the plant medicines are on a bit of a different degree than most things that would give pleasure. So that depends on the personal person though, and the way they deal with things like pleasure and how they are with shit that makes them feel better or good. But traditional shamanic experiences are never even about the feeling, and that's the thing. There's a lot less of a feeling compared to actual drugs, I would say, and that is the main thing that people get addicted to, is the feeling on top of the physical, like, addictiveness that creates a survival like need within them that they feel like they can't live without, you know. Psychedelics also work on serotonin instead of dopamine, and dopamine is quite an addictive molecule naturally. It may not be physically addictive, but it leads to craving, and that's the thing that most people end up chasing, and it's very short-term pleasure and happiness compared to serotonin, which is more long-term happiness. And psychedelics work on serotonin, and so do antidepressants. And I think there is a very the government's been researching it for years in therapeutic use and healing the brain and past trauma. But I think there's something really special there if they really I think within a few years, even in like a very lower dose, it would be better, much better than an antidepressant, because antidepressants are actually usually quite robotic feeling, and they usually don't assess the root cause of the depression. And with the plant medicine or psychedelic, it actually does kind of make you conscious and think, and it helps you heal such a thing at the root. But yes, dopamine is in anything that feeds short-term pleasure. So, you know, sex, overeating, binge watching shows, very short-term kind of pleasure that makes you feel shitty longer than it makes you feel good, I guess you could say. But yeah, there's many types of addictive behaviors that people fall into without realizing. And with the plant medicines, in clinical studies, it was usually only needed 2 to 3 times, and for the rest of their life, their perspective was changed, and they had a much brighter perspective on life, instead of needing to take an antidepressant for months, days, or years on end, which actually kind of more numbs the issue rather than the root cause. I would say, in my time, I did make a mistake and come upon something that I shouldn't have, an actual drug. And in this, I understood psychological addiction to a degree. And I've seen it my whole life. I understand it very well, more than most people, considering every single person I was around growing up wasn't a drug addict. And in this, I think I've already experienced everything I have to, and I'll never make the mistake again. That's the thing, because I've already went through the generational curse. I've already broke the curse of looking outside of myself for happiness. I think people get it kind of twisted, because people have this shitty perception about shit like this, and even with the mistake I made, it was still shamanic, but it was still a mistake, and nobody should ever do drugs. And yeah, I definitely understand it though, and I think God kind of put me through it for a reason, so I have the perspective to help other people get through such a thing, even if it wasn't as much as some other people, because I've still never tried hard drugs, and yeah, I never will, because I know better. And you know, I just thought I would mention this. I think it's kind of ironic that the only legal drug, alcohol, is actually fully physically addictive, while something like plant medicines are considered illegal when it literally makes you more conscious, while alcohol makes you less conscious. Alcohol actually allows demonic spirits to start to take a hold of you, and plant medicines actually allow you to find your spirit and soul. And I think people don't think it's as bad of a thing because, oh, it's obviously legal, and nobody looks at it like any other kind of way. And I just think it's really ironic. But yeah, alcohol tends to make people have more of a closed mind and more closed off to different type of perspectives, because it streamlines their consciousness in a certain way to where they're just not open to other ways of being or thinking. And in such, I think alcohol actually also puts people more in a state of fear when they're not drinking. And in that, the government's main use of control is fear. And if they can keep people in fear, it literally makes people easier to control and fall in line. But yeah, alcohol almost completely severs your connection to the spiritual realms, your spirit and soul, and therefore God, because God is the divine essence of such. So yeah, that's why I've always had such a hatred towards such, I guess. It makes you search in the world for happiness instead of within, in your spirit and soul, where God truly resides. Alcohol dulls and streamlines people's consciousness a lot more than they would realize, even with like occasional use, and pretty much completely locks you in to a perception of reality only of the physical realm and nothing spiritual. It also makes you tend to search more externally for pleasure and desire. It makes you give in to more of the flesh and the craving of such, which is the lower nature. It's not your higher self, your spirit and soul, or God. It's the lower nature, the flesh, the craving, the desire. I think it's kind of funny, because if you're scared of spiritual things and you drink alcohol, anytime you get near blackout drunk, or just not as in tune with your body, that basically allows a demonic spirit to literally take control of your vessel and body. And that's why a lot of people do a lot of fucking stupid shit when they're drunk. A lot of unconscious ass shit that they regret later, because it allows the spirit to actually use their body or vessel. But yeah, the reason in Corinthians 4:4 in the Bible that it says Lucifer is the god of the physical realm is because when you give in to the desires and temptations of the physical realm, of the world, of your flesh, you're basically giving in to Lucifer and the lower nature, instead of God, your spirit and soul, and your mind, the divine essence of God. So, alcohol specifically is kind of a gateway to this type of behavior and sin. It leads to this type of mindset of rationalizing sin and it becoming more common in your life. And I think it's kind of a bit more devious than people could ever realize. But yeah. The co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous actually used psychedelics to completely stop drinking as well. So that's just a thing I thought I'd throw out there as well. In the West, it's a common thing in rehabilitation centers to indoctrinate people into thinking that someone stays an addict forever for the rest of their lives. And I think that's simply untrue, because if they get completely away from the thing and they're not addicted, they don't need the thing, they can fully heal back to the state that they were before falling into such a set of behaviors. And therefore, they're not an addict or a drug addict. People can be addicted to many things, not just drugs, like I say. I would say the generational curse of addiction is actually much different than the way people would think of, like, addiction. The generational curse of addiction is basically looking for happiness outside of yourself, and that's what it is. Feeling like you need something outside of yourself for some sort of happiness, and that's why it runs beyond drugs. And this is the thing about psychedelics, they actually make you turn within. They make you look within your spirit and soul and your mind. They don't, it's not as much of an external thing or as much for the feeling. Um, and honestly, people can use the medicine wrong, though, if they don't respect the sacred divine medicine of God, which is what it is when respected in the right way. But usually the medicine actually tends to push people away like that, though, because it's very conscious and it doesn't like when you don't respect such. I was always very spiritual, even as a child. And honestly, I was kind of bred to be a shaman. It runs in my blood. Um, like, shamans are just very, very connected spiritually. And I've always been this way. So, yes. But put simply, a shaman is someone who connects spiritually to God at all times, regardless of plant medicines or not. But the plant medicines are the main things that are known of shamans, and they connect to the spirit, soul, mind, consciousness, which is the divine essence of God. And a drug addict is someone who simply can't live without a drug. And it's like I say, I always promised I would never be a drug addict. So simply, I'm not, and I'll never be, because there's no drug I can't live without. Simply. All in all, I would say that there's definitely huge differences between a shaman and a drug addict. And I think the stigma in society around the whole domain of everything is so bad that plant medicines and psychedelics and the sacred tradition of it being a spiritual medicine to connect with God kind of gets lost in the translation of such. And in all honesty, a lot of people just don't like me and created the narrative that I was a drug addict to try and slander my name, I guess you could say. Which is simply untrue. But yeah.